Hello everyone, it's Helen at Journaling Planet, and today we're going to be turning something like this into our very own bespoke vintage paper thanks to the use of some old candle wax. I'm going to show you what you can do with that and also what you can do if you don't have any old candle wax lying around. But this is the next day in my 100-day project, and it's all about upcycling things that are just lying around. This candle burnt down beautifully in the middle, but look at all this leftover wax. So I wasn't going to waste that. I had to find a use for it. I have seen this technique used on other channels, channels such as Joey Diffie's channel. I did not come up with this technique of using wax to create texture on a piece of paper, but I am going to put my own twist on it. I am going to hopefully come up with something even more textured than this. And I'm just using a piece of paper that went through the printer. It's actually the first draft of one of my novels, and it's got red pen all over it from where I'd made mistakes. So not really much use for this piece of paper now. Just want to upcycle it. So I'm upcycling that. I'm upcycling my candle wax, and I'm going to, as much as possible, use just upcycled materials and some media like, paint and washi tape and things like that. So let's get started. My first step is to create vintage motifs across this paper. I have done a create your own craft paper video that lots of people watched, and thank you for that. I really appreciate it. But I created all kinds of different motifs in that video, and this time I'm specifically focusing on vintage because I think that's what a lot of us are drawn to in the community, and creating your own vintage paper, if you haven't got access to vintage papers in thrift stores and things, is a really cool thing to be able to do. It's unique. It makes your project more unique. So what I'm going to do is take my extremely grubby, look at the state of that, acrylic block and start loading it up with some vintage inspired ink stamps. Okay, a bit of a weird mix on there, some kind of bottles, like vintage bottles, and some postage stamps and some text. I'm not really sure how this is going to come out, but the key thing to note is that I am using archival ink, which means I will be able to get the page wet after I've stamped all over it. In my process, this is key, but you'll probably be able to come up with other ways of marking your page other than using things like wet paint. For example, you could use felt tip. If you haven't got any archival ink, you can improvise. This is just the way I would like to do it. Okay, I couldn't resist just putting my Eiffel Tower stamp across that as well, even though that wasn't the original plan. Never mind, just had an urge. And as you can see right now, it's looking a little bit of a mess. The text behind is a bit more prominent than we'd like, and the stamps aren't that visible, and really this just looks like a piece of copy paper that someone's done some ink stamping on. First thing I'm going to do to try and get beyond that is I'm going to take a paintbrush to my Distress Oxide ink. Oh gosh, that used to say Vintage Photo, but it's got so much ink on it now you can barely tell. And I'm just going to paint with it over the page, getting a little bit of pigment on the background there. If you don't have any of this, you can make yourself a cup of tea and just paint the page with the tea. So by this point, you can probably see that the vintage effect is starting to take shape on the page, thanks to the colouring. It is very, very delicate when it's wet. So if you peel it up to put it on a drying space, do be careful. That's exactly what I'm going to do. And then we're going to get into our first round of wax melting. So I'm going to set this aside to dry, and I'll be back shortly. So that has dried really quickly, and it is a bit crumpled, but that doesn't matter because it's about to go under the iron. So here comes the safety talk. I am going to cut some little bits of wax, just using my scissors from this. I'm going to sandwich my piece of paper between two pieces of greaseproof paper so that there's no wax on my iron, and I'm going to iron over the top of it to melt the wax and create an added texture to my paper that almost makes the paper look see-through. So that's my technique. It would probably be best for you to do this in a ventilated room, open a window. At the end of the day, you're heating up a substance and it does smell quite strong when you do it, or can do, depending on what kind of wax you're using. I'm just going to take this old candle. I'm just going to start hacking bits of wax away with my scissors so that they land on the piece of paper. I'm going to be quite liberal with it. This is only the first round of wax. I'm going to do more wax later. So it doesn't matter if I don't get it everywhere that I want it on the first sitting, because there's going to be a second sitting. I do really want to use up this wax, you see. So, and going over it a second time creates a sort of seal for all the other things that I'm doing, including splashing paint around, adding washi, maybe even cutting up some magazine images and adding those. So let's see how it goes. That's that. I did say if you didn't have any candles, I would give you an alternative. You can just use wax crayons, and I happen to have these metallic ones. So I think they're designed for kids. I mean, they're definitely designed for kids. They were only like a couple of pounds, very cheap. And since I want to possibly use them as actual crayons at some point, I'm going to cut at this bottom end. Just get some, but you can do this with any coloured wax crayon. If you're taking your kids' wax crayons, then make sure that you cut from the ends so that they can still use the crayons afterwards. Okay, that's my piece of paper covered in a decent amount of wax. I'm going to place my paper down. My iron heats up very quickly. I don't use my iron to actually iron clothes. I only use it for craft projects. So I don't need to turn on my iron too early. It will heat up really quickly. And I'm just going to turn it to a medium heat. You can see there are some higher settings. And I'm only going to the second setting. So that's as high as I'm going. And that's enough for me. I think a medium heat. I mean, definitely it will depend on the strength of your iron, the age of your iron. Start low and then build up from there, I would say. Soon as you finish, turn your iron off or down, depending on if you're going to use it again. I'm already loving how this looks. You can see this kind of see-through quality that the wax gives you. This wax would have just gone really in the bin. There was nothing else I could have done with it. But by cutting it up on this piece of paper and just getting my iron to it, I'm creating a little bit of extra texture in this project. I'm going to be coming back to use some more wax shortly. But first of all, let's get some other texture down on the page. I'm feeling like I want some more watercolour splashes on this. So I'm going to get my trusty paintbrush and dip into one of my watercolours that I have just sitting at the side of me here. I'm going to go for a sort of yellowy colour. Okay, this is starting to come together. Yes, I will have to wait for the watercolour to dry. So that's another sort of drying time consideration with this project. The thing is about making your own craft paper, as I said in the other video on this subject, it's never going to be the quickest option, but it is going to be the most unique option, and often it's also the cheapest option because you're using things that are in your stash already. So I am going to let this dry. Thankfully, watercolour takes about 2 minutes to dry, maybe 5 minutes tops. I think that's just enough time for me to go and stack the dishwasher. Let's see. So I had time to load the dishwasher and get a snack. I don't want anybody out there saying that I'm inefficient. So I zoomed you in a little bit so that you can see up close what's happening with this paper right now. You can see the extra texture from the wax. You can see the colour from the watercolour, but there's still some texture to add here. Obviously, this would be fine to tear up and use for tags or pockets or belly bands or anything else you want. If you're happy here, you don't have to go any further. But you know what I'm like. I always like to build extra texture. I always like to spend a little bit longer. At some point, I will decide that's it. That's all the time I've got for this project. When I'm diving into something like this, where I'm creating my own vintage paper, well, I really want to go to town on it. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start adding some torn bits of this lovely washi tape. I know you're going to ask me where I got it. I'm not sure. I think I got it from a place called Shine, Shein, but I could be wrong. It could be Washi Shop as well. So one of those two places, I suspect. I am addicted to washi tape, but then again, I use it all the time. So I think it's okay to buy a new roll here and there once I've whittled down the stuff that I've got, because it's so useful. Okay, let me start adding some torn pieces of this. I've already got a torn piece from another project that I'm just going to start using straight away. And if I need more, I'll add it as I go. Okay, added some pieces of washi tape to that. And the next thing I'm going to do is actually start looking at some magazine images that I've cut up. I'm not really sure if any of these are going to blend into this piece of paper, but I'm going to give it a go, and I'm going to use some gesso to see if I can blend them in a little bit. And then I'm going to do another layer of wax sealing. I have even picked up a few bits of scrap music paper that were sitting on my desk and just torn them up, inked them and stuck them down in places where I didn't like how prominent the background text was. But I think now I'm at a stage where I'm ready to add some more wax. I'm maybe just going to add a tiny little bit more washi in the middle here, where I can just see there's less texture going on. But other than that, I'm ready to repeat the process I did before. Add some wax, get my iron over it, and seal in all the colour, all the layers that I've done with the wax. After that, we'll be able to look at creating something from this piece of paper. The wonderful texture on this paper cannot be overestimated. It does not look, at least not in person, like it was made from a piece of copy paper. There is so much texture over this now, and the wax has sealed everything in. So now that I've got this piece of paper that has some wonderful texture to it, I'm going to start making something from it. I'm going to make a very quick tag, and I'm going to show you how all this hard work pays off when it comes to making ephemera for your journal. Here I have just a standard piece of scrap cardboard from an old envelope. I'm going to make a tag, and it's going to be the easiest tag that I've ever made. First thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to stick my vintage paper down on this piece of card using my glue stick. Then I'm going to cut the corners for my tag, and I'm going to top it. This tag has so much texture in it. It's absolutely gorgeous. and I don't need to do another thing to it. I could, of course, I could find a picture of a bird that I've cut out of a book, or a picture of a vintage lady that I've cut out of a magazine and put it in the middle. But the truth is that the paper that I've created is so full of beautiful texture. I don't want to put anything over it. I just want to have it as an abstract tag. This piece of lace is upcycled from some underwear that had a hole in them. So I haven't really spent anything to make this. I've just used what's in my stash, some ink stamps, some old candle wax, a bit of washi tape that I already had, and of course my paints, which I have as well. I'm really not sure that the camera is bringing out the detail because of the reflection, but all I can tell you is in real life, this tag is one of my favourite tags that I've ever made, and will definitely be taking pride place in my journal. I hope this has given you some insight into how you can create your own faux vintage papers and using up some old candle wax whilst you're on. Please do let me know about your adventures in the comments. I'd love to know of anything that you do in order to enhance this effect, or indeed put your own unique twist on this effect. Because one thing I can say about this tag, nobody in the world has one like it. It's mine, it's unique, and I made it. Thanks so much for watching today. I hope you found it inspiring, and I will see you next time.